So, you get your masked philosopher today, and this will be a new experiment for me. And we've been talking about ways of knowing, epistemology, and we've spent a lot of time on empiricism, sense-based knowledge, and then rationalism that says, no, we have to use our reason because our senses deceive us. I had mentioned earlier about mysticism. And this often carries very negative connotations in evangelical fundamentalist circles, which I find fascinating. If I was simply going to define mystic, I would say it's one who seeks union with God. Now, you could have Buddhist mystics, Hindu mystics, Muslim, Jewish, Christian mystics, anyone who's seeking this like direct union with the one, or it, or God, I would put in this mystical category. I think it was, I can't remember now if it was William James or James Fraser in the Golden Bough. It was probably William James. He was talking about these 4 identifiers as he studied mysticism in different cultures around the world and different religions. He realized they all had 4 things in common. And the first one was the spontaneity. In other words, you can't make it happen. You can't be like, I'm going to unite with God, so I'm going to go out and fast for 40 days, or stay awake for 7 days, or whatever. It's something that kind of comes upon you. Now, there are techniques you can do, of course, to enhance it. But a lot of these would be either considered like cheating or shortcuts, like taking hallucinogenic drugs or sleep deprivation or different things that might create these sorts of feels, but it's not the same as the ones that simply come upon you. Secondly, it's ineffable, which is just a fancy word meaning it's beyond words. We don't have the human words to describe these encounters with the divine, which makes sense, right? So mystics have to use metaphor and allegory. And even in the Bible, there's a lot of debate on different revelation that came through these divine encounters of, are they speaking literally, or are they speaking metaphorically? Or are they simply using the best comparison they have for what they're observing? I gave you this word, noetic. Anyone remember what noetic means? It means it affects you. It changes your life. It's not just head knowledge. If you have a mystical encounter with God, you will not be the same. You'll be different. You can't help it. It's not a window you can close once it's been open. Even though these accounts may just be like flashes of lightning in the darkness, once you see it, you can't go back to the everyday, mundane world. And then fourthly, which is a super pro and a super con, is that it's self-verifiable. The encounter itself is all the evidence you need. But what's the problem with that?
No one else can see it?
Yeah, and I don't know. Have any of you ever had someone come up to you at church or school or some religious context and say, God gave me a word of wisdom for you? And I'm just like, really? Tell me more. But usually I just stop it right there, and I'm like, God has my number. He knows how to get in touch with me, and I'm listening. And so it's good. But how can I challenge that, right? Say, no, God did not, or yes, God most certainly did, because it's such a personal, subjective encounter. There's no way to corroborate it or to debunk it because that person had the experience, that encounter. And I mean, it's great that you don't have to have data or science or evidence, but what if what you were encountering wasn't really God? From anything from a figment of your own imagination to maybe something much darker or more malignant.
What about, there was this like news article in, I think it was like Britain, and they were saying that this guy like was trying to like have like a spiritual connection with God, but in fact he was like, turns out he thinks he was actually being spoken to by Satan or by demonic like spirits, and was misguided because of that. So
Sure.
like deception and knowing like, oh well, was it really God or was it someone else?
Right. And if there's no way you can test or check or verify these things, I mean, on the one hand, it means you can stand alone against the world. On the other hand, you might have just gone to crazy town and no one can help you because you're so sure. And so take it for what it's worth. I think it's an important way of knowing, but it's full of pitfalls as well as benefits. All right.
But for us, there is like the Bible, which we use to test and prove, like what God being sounds like. So like we can measure everything that we hear, or that we feel like we hear the God's word, and if it doesn't align with the word, then we know.
Okay, why are you giving the Bible that kind of status? Huh?
So I knew you were gonna ask that question.
No, I mean, that's awesome,
Yeah.
but why?
Yeah.
Why aren't you using the Quran or the Bhagavad Gita or a philosophy critical thinking book? Why the Bible?
Yeah, I wish I had like these things just like to pull out of my brain, but I don't. So.
Well, you've come to the right place. Because that's part of what apologetics, the second part. First, I'm just dealing with how do we know things.
Yeah.
Then we're going to get to how do you defend what you know.
Yeah.
Or in this case, what you believe.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's the thing. A lot of people like to pull the Bible out and use it like, well,
Yeah.
the Bible says it, I believe it, that settles it. And it's just like, well, why does that settle it? Why should I give that any more credence than other sacred texts? And we'll get there. A lot of these guys, that will be their strategy. First, they have to prove God exists. Then they have to prove that God revealed his will in Scripture through revelation. And then they try to convince you of the truth of God. But it's like the 3-step process. So that is in here, so it'll be enjoyable. And it may resonate with you, it may not. All right. Existentialism. I don't have a time check.
2:17.
All right, thanks. So existentialism, first off, it's virtually impossible to define. And the reason it's almost impossible to define is because it's so individualistic. And so what I'm going to give you is not a definition of existentialism, but themes that many, although not all, existentialists may or may not subscribe to. So the first one is individualism. Who I like to give credit for to being the father of existentialism is a Danish philosopher called Søren Kierkegaard. And he said on his tombstone, he just wanted two words, the individual. And I love that about Søren so much. But because it's such an individual philosophy. Every existentialist could have their own individual definition of what it means. Whew, what a mess, right off the get-go. Because of this individuality, it brings alienation. Because like in this room, even though there's only 7 of us in here, there's probably at least 10 different worlds going on, if not more. Some of you are doing multiples. I know I am. And so if these represent the people in this world, and some of you may be friends, some you're just acquaintances, there may even be some like soulmate level connections. But whether you're super connected to people or you simply know them because you're sharing space with them, you're alienated from each other. Because no one, not even someone you feel so close to, completely understands you. There's still going to be hidden parts. And you might say, no, me and my beloved, we share everything. There's no secrets. It's all, I don't care. Even if you tell them everything, they're not you. They don't get it. Think about your siblings growing up in the same family. You all grew up in the same family, but none of you grew up in the same family. I have a sister 6 years younger than me. She did not have the same parents I had. Even though we have the same biological parents, they were different by the time she came along than when I came along. So weird. And think about when you talk about memories of family growing up or vacations, holidays, sometimes you just wonder, was I the only person there? Because everyone else's memories are just so skewed. But those are how they remember. That was their reality. This alienation leads to angst. Or maybe it's not the alienation that does it. There could be other reasons. But I love this word. It means fear, anxiety, and dread, all rolled into one. But it's a fear, anxiety, and dread of you know not what. It's not like a cave bear is chasing you, or you're not going to be able to pay your rent, or you're afraid of a pandemic, or fires, or earthquakes. This is just that. It's like in the Matrix, where Morpheus is describing it like a splinter in your mind. You know something's wrong with the world, but you can't quite put your finger on it. But it leaves you completely unsettled. And so that's angst, existential angst. But there's hope, because existentialism is also huge on freedom. They believe we actually are free agents with free choices. It doesn't mean I can choose to dunk a basketball or to give birth to a baby or something like that, but I have real choices with real consequences. Yeah, they're limited. I like to call it bracketed freedom, but it's real freedom with real consequences. What I also love about existentialism, though, is they couple freedom with responsibility. A lot of people in our culture want freedom without responsibility or ownership. And in existentialism, it's like, no, that's part of the cost of freedom, is to take accountability for your actions and the outcomes of those actions. That's how I raised all my kids. As they would ask for more and more freedom, I would give them more and more responsibility. And it wasn't like a tit for a tat, but I would try to explain to them, if I can't count on you to take the trash cans down once a week and bring them back up after they've been emptied, how can you expect me to trust you with the family car that could potentially kill someone. I mean, and I don't want to make it punitive, but I want to make it instructive. I would want someone to be able to care for a animal before they had a baby, right? I mean, that I can see that you're watering it, you're feeding it, you're keeping it warm, safe, and it's not just about you. You've showed you're responsible, and now you get more freedom. And I see them as like a match set. Rejection of labels and categories. Kierkegaard said, if you label me, you negate me. Love that. I mean, have you guys ever experienced that? Yeah, if anyone wants to share any tales, I'm going to take a little break. Sit down.
What was your question?
Have you ever felt like someone labeled you something,
Yeah.
and when they did that, you could tell they weren't seeing you anymore?
Oh, definitely.
Who wants to start?
Oh, I guess I'll share something for you. So, well, actually, yeah, might as well. So I have autism. I'm on the spectrum or whatever. And so, like, once people found out about this when I was in, like, high school, so so I prefer being treated like the same as anyone else. But because of this one little factor, my teacher in high school mentioned it and everyone thought it was hilarious. So everyone just like completely like distanced themselves from me once they found this one thing. Cool. Sorry. So it was a very interesting experience just because like once people found out this like one little thing about me, they were like, oh, okay, we're gonna stay really far away from this like one individual. And then another time was in athletics. And I still have asthma, but my coaches, like, they didn't want me on their team because I had asthma. And so I just decided to pick the worst possible sport for asthma, which was cross country. And this is how I did it. My friend came up to me and was like, hey, you want to join a sport? And I'm like, oh, what is it? It's like, oh, it's cross country. I was like, oh, what do you guys have to do? It's like, oh, all you do is run. And so I was like, oh, fine. It sounds better than football because football has too many plays and everything. And I'm like, I don't think I can memorize all these plays. And then after like the first week, I was like, oh, I hate cross country. And then my parents were like, oh, why? It's like, because all we do is run.
Right.
Because that's all. And so I just stuck with it.
I like the autism, though. It's a great example.
Yeah.
And why you may not want to share that.
Yeah, because there are like a lot of people that judge, but like I've grown to like just like not care because everyone can think whatever they want. Everyone's allowed to interpret what they want. And so if they want to hate me, then sure. If they don't like me, then great. I don't care. I'm not gonna go and try to live up to their expectations because my parents were telling me this like example that's basically like there's like two people. There's a child that's like a son and his grandfather, and they're walking this trail, and one's carrying this, and the son is carrying the backpack, and these other people are walking the same road. They're like, oh, that's terrible. The grandfather is making their own little son carry the backpack. And so they take it, and then the grandfather carries the backpack, and the son doesn't carry anything. And another person comes up, and another person comes up, and they're all like confused as to why the grandfather is carrying it. So the son carries it. It just goes back and forth, just to say that you can't live up to everyone's expectations of what they want you to be or who they think you should be. So you should be yourself, but you should live according to what you believe God has planned for you, according to like the Christian perspective.
Okay. Thanks, Aiden. Anyone else want to share an example?
I think titles in our society in general, I think that's big. Like coming here to our school, like San Diego Christian College, think of that title.
Yep.
Let that resonate with you guys, and like you guys go out there, and we're viewed as like something totally different, or something that like we're such held to a high standard, or we're such held to a low standard, and that's just crazy to think about because that's how we form. Like it's unfortunate, but like the way I grew up is like that's how you form your opinions. That's how you form that's how you judge people by their
Mhm. How about even gender or
Yeah.
sex, right?
Yeah. Honestly, any type of title makes me freak out a little bit. It feels like that freedom with the brackets on it. Yeah.
Right.
Because it's like you're negating like everything else that might even have anything to do with that, and you're saying this is all that matters when there's like really all of this outside.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And we just came through an election year, right?
Yeah.
And just how charged the term Democrat and Republican is now, or progressive and conservative. And do you really want to associate yourself with all the baggage that comes from those labels? Or even Christian, what that means today, or evangelical, or what does that mean? What it means to you may be very different than what it means to our culture at large.
I think another thing to add to that is like I think one thing that's like probably the most debatable on this campus, or what it seems like, is like everyone has a different like denomination of Christianity. Someone's Baptist, another person's like Presbyterian or Lutheran or evangelical. You have all these other all these different denominations, and everyone's like, oh well, mine is the right one, or like Bibles, like oh KJV, or you have someone that says New King James, and it's like, oh my gosh, what is that? So everyone, it's so
No, that's
so
good.
funny.
Denominations especially, do you really want to have to check off every little box that comes with being a part of a particular sect? And that's hard. And as we become more postmodern, I think less and less people are willing to do that. It's too much of a, if you're buying like the whole box set or something, it all comes together, you're just like, but I don't want that and that, I want this, and we'll get there. All right, what's the next? Rejection labels and categories. This one. Truth is subjectivity.
What does that mean?
Yeah, what does that mean? What Kierkegaard meant by it was, truth doesn't happen out there in the abstract. Truth happens as it interfaces with the individual. That's where truth is occurring.
So then you would say truth and knowledge is relative.
No. Yes. Okay. Kierkegaard isn't denying absolute, objective, universal truth,
Okay.
what I would call capital T truth. Right? But he's saying humans, the only kind of truth you're going to know is subjective.
I have another question. So if existentialists like to reject labels and categories, would they label themselves as an existentialist, or is that something that other people put on them?
It's usually something other people would label them. But it would be very rare for an existentialist to call themselves an existentialist. Unless they just like being contrary and are calling themselves that, because typically you're not supposed to like labels or categories. But even existentialism is such a loaded term, right? I mean, I'm giving you a very Christian version of it, but that's not how most people know existentialism today. Kierkegaard was a Christian, and his problem was he was growing up, he was writing in mid-1800s, so 19th century. He was dead by the time he was 45, I believe. Unbelievable. So I think he's writing from like 1800, born 1800, died by 1845. And at that time period, Europe was a Christian continent. Denmark was a Christian country. And he wrote a book called Attack Upon Christendom, where he was mocking Denmark. He said, I live in the most amazing country where even dogs and cats are Christians, and even the Muslims and Jews are, for all intents and purposes, Christians. It's like, but when everyone's a Christian, no one is. And they had an intellectual understanding of Christianity, but Kierkegaard realized that's not what makes you a Christian. And so he changed the question from what is a Christian to what must I do to be a Christian? See the difference? One is an objective, detached answer. This is a subjective, personal answer. And that changed everything for Kierkegaard.
What did he come up with as his solution to the question?
You only know what you experience. I'll throw in personally, but it's redundant. And those were those examples I think I gave you the other day about being in jail or being a junkie or fixing your car or baking a cake. We can read all that stuff in books, but until you actually do it, you don't epignosko it. That was the Greek word. As opposed to gnosis, which means to know. Epignosis. Experiential knowledge. And I'm talking generally, there could be exceptions on context, but there's another type of Greek word for knowledge, and I can't remember it off the top of my head, but it means to take that which you know and you've experienced and then being able to apply it to life.
Is that wisdom?
That's what I would call wisdom. But there's a Greek word for that kind of knowledge. And there's a passage, I think in Peter, where he uses all three Greek words for knowledge, which is kind of neat when you can see that. In English, it's just going to say no, 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 but in the Greek, it will show you he's building on these ideas of deeper and deeper types of knowledge. I'll try to find that passage for you guys. Questions, comments? Okay. Let's go back to this. Edward pointed out quite quickly, this leads to relativism. You've got your truth, because you've got your experiences, I've got mine. And you can't tell me what's true for me, and I can't tell you what's true for you. Your truth or your knowledge is all based on your own experience. Now, a lot of rationalists like to jump on this and say, nice logical contradiction, because you're making a truth claim, saying truth is relative, which that's an absolute truth claim. And that's why I want to make that qualifier. Kierkegaard isn't denying some sort of absolute universal cosmic truth, but he doesn't have that. He's a subjective individual, and the only kind of truth he has is this, what he's personally encountered and experienced. He's not denying there's other truth out there. It's simply, if this is the totality of reality, oh, I miss drawing circles. Which I would say is a synonym for God. And this is God's perspective. He sees everything, all the time. But if this is created things, how much can I possibly know with my limited perspective?
How much at all?
Yes. Insignificant. So that's kind of what he's getting at here. This would be like the little t truth. This would be the capital T truth or knowing. I'm sure there's more themes. Those are the only ones that are coming up in my file at the moment, though. But hopefully that gives you a better understanding. But tell me the theological significance of this. It changed Christendom.
Faith without works is dead.
True.
So like, I just think that it kind of goes well with that whole concept that like a Christian life just lived, I guess, in submission to the world isn't really actually Christian life at all.
Okay.
What do you mean?
I think you're kind of getting at more of your actions show your beliefs.
Yeah.
But that's not really what's happening here. I don't think.
Well, would a Christian that believes like that trust the Bible because he hasn't personally experienced anything that's happened in it?
Well, will experiencing the Bible save you?
No.
What do you need to be saved?
You need to trust in Jesus Christ's death on the cross for your salvation.
Okay, that's stuff you read in a book.
You need faith.
Ooh, you do need faith.
I think Kierkegaard is trying to tell us, from his point of view, that in order to truly call yourself a Christian, you need to have truly experienced God.
Yes.
That's how you can achieve salvation.
Right, and I feel like well, for me personally, like when I hear the word Christian.
Just one second. Could you say that again? And will you turn the, that was beautiful and concise. That's good.
Kierkegaard is telling us that the only way you can call yourself a Christian is if you have personally experienced God, and because of that, you can put your faith in Him, which results in salvation.
Thank you. Okay, go ahead, Carlos.
That was basically, yeah. That like, to me, like when I hear the word Christian, I think of someone who's like, who learns and wants to relearn. And you're gonna continue to learn and relearn, and I guess, I don't know what I was saying.
It's all right. Yeah, go ahead, Edward.
So then in that understanding of Kierkegaard's argument, then God can only be understood by those whom he shows himself to, and you can't really do anything to affect, as a person can't do anything to affect them. Only God can truly come into their life. Correct?
That sounds more like a reform position, like monergism, where God is doing it all, God's doing the drawing. I don't know that Kierkegaard would go that far. He's
Okay.
just focused on he's really trying to make the difference between, and I used the example, I think, when I went over it briefly, of we all know about Donald Trump, or what we've been told by others, but I don't think any of us in here have met him personally. And the same way, how many people in Christendom know tons of stuff about the gospel or Jesus or the Bible or theology? Kierkegaard wants to know, but do you know Jesus? Have you experienced Jesus? Because if you haven't, he would simply say you're an intellectual or a cultural Christian. And so this is where we get this whole language of personal relationship. No one talked like that before Kierkegaard. In the medieval period, maybe if you were the Pope or a saint or someone, you knew Jesus, But the common people, they just trusted what the people in authority told them about the church, the Bible, God, salvation, etc. And Kierkegaard saying, I live in this country full of theologians, but I don't think most of them even know God. And that's horrifying. I think it's horrifying. So that's a huge difference he's making. But that wasn't enough for him. And this is where I pulled out that big word for you. Kierkegaard is a fideist. And a fideist is someone, whenever push comes to shove between your faith and your reason, a fideist always puts faith over reason. I was just reading a Facebook post this morning by someone who's visited the school, brought missions teams. I have a lot of respect for them. And their whole post was about how frustrated they were by if they were on Fox News, it was like one reality. If they were on CNN or MSNBC, it was a whole nother reality. And he's like, people, we've got to learn to use reason and critical thinking. And yeah, I'm like, yeah, that's great. And I was fine with this whole article until I got to the last sentence where he said, otherwise, how are we going to have a reasonable faith? And I'm just thinking, who cares if our faith is reasonable? And once again, I'm not saying I want you to be irrational, but what God asks us to do by faith may not be reasonable to the unregenerate mind. It may be madness, what Jesus is asking of us. Now, as far as God's reason goes, it may be perfectly rational, but this is what I'm trying to convey to you. Without the illumination of the Holy Spirit, without the renewal of your mind, without that saving faith that comes from God, what makes you think you're going to be able to use human reason or data or evidence to change an unregenerate mind? I just think that's nonsense. If that was true, I would say all the intellectuals, all the geniuses, all the brilliant people would all be Christians. And then all the morons, imbeciles would not be. But I would say that is not what we observe in the world. If anything, I would say it's the opposite. And 1 Corinthians talks about this, about Paul talking about the wisdom of this world compared to the wisdom of God. And it's something not one of these apologists seems to get. They really think you can use reason and logic and evidence to convert someone into a believer. Now, they'll give a lip service to it's the work of the Holy Spirit, but then they'll give you all these reasons to get people into the kingdom. And it's really trippy to me. And if any of these are your sacred cows, I'm not meaning to attack them personally. I just thought it was such a great sampler of heavy hitters, and they're getting a little old. They're going to have to add some fresh faces, but this is a pretty solid list. I mean, they've been classic coming up. All right. I want to unpack this fideism a little bit more. How much time I got?
It's 2:48.
Perfect. The mask is helping with the toxic fumes. That's good. Are any of you in my ethics class?
It was.
You've had it? Did you have it?
It was good.
I do talk about this in ethics when I do existential ethics.
Yeah, I think he mentioned a book from Soren Kierkegaard, I think, where he like did like a sort of like a book on his like experience growing up and how it affected his view on existentialism.
Oh yeah, he talked about his upbringing a bit. Wow, this is a workout. Whew, I missed the whiteboard. So happy. Okay. So this idea of fideism, faith over reason, what typically happens, and I love doing this when churches or camps and stuff ask me to come speak, I ask them to give me all sorts of reasons to believe in God. Like, why is that a rational thing to do? And so, we'll just start here, my little stick guy, and let's build a stairway of reason. So, how are ways we can know God better? Or know things? But specifically about God.
The Bible.
Yay! The Bible. The Bible. How else?
Shroud of Turin. The Shroud of Turin.
Yeah, like,
Wrapping
I'll
that-
make it a little broader. Archaeology. Like biblical archaeology. Amazing.
There's so many funny
All the
ones.
corroboration from what's in the Bible with what they've discovered in the Near East. I think Josh McDowell, Evidence That Demands a Verdict, I think he did an evidentialist Bible. So if you're like reading through Judges and it's talking about the city of Jericho, there'll be like a footnote, and then it will show you the archaeological digs, what they found about the city, yada yada, and I just think that stuff's super. What else?
Creation.
And we have groups like ICR, Answers in Genesis, who are fighting to say, and their reasoning is, if we can disprove evolution, the only other option is creation. So it's almost like a negative apologetics. If you can disprove the other person, which is a philosophical fallacy, that's the either or fallacy, but oh well. What else? We have philosophy, apologetics, like people like Ravi Zacharias and Francis Schaeffer.
About Revelation.
What do you mean?
Like just the same way God did it through the Bible, like God speaking to someone.
Ooh. This is a stairway of reason.
So we
Maybe I should write that. And at least how I defined revelation was it's knowledge that's coming to us not through our reason or experience. It's outside of both, or our emotions. It's not about the feels or the intellect or the life experience. It's we're being imparted information beyond ourselves. And even though I think that's a way to know things, it's not a reason-based way to know things. Anything else? It doesn't matter. We could go. Anyways, we have people making these, and Kierkegaard is, the whole goal is, if we're trying to get people to God, is to use reason, use apologetics, use rhetoric, use whatever gifts God's given us, so we can help people be 99.9% sure that God is true. And so using reason and apologetics and evidence, we want to get, now, yes, everyone can only be saved by faith. But now instead of having to have 100% faith, you only need a 0.1%. And so using reason and evidence, Kierkegaard is like, it's like we get people to this point and then we say, okay, let go, let God, and take that hop of faith into the arms of Jesus. And Kierkegaard is like, are you people insane? If faith is what's pleasing to God, why would you try to minimize it to the least amount of possible? And Kierkegaard used his reason to show how irrational Christianity was. Anything irrational about Christianity? Or if you prefer, supra-rational?
It's not based on what you see.
Trinity.
Yeah. Trinity. I like to joke that Christians are into high math. 3 equals 1. 1 plus 1 equals 1. I mean, there's lots of weird math in Christianity.
Grace. As well.
Oh yeah, grace, love, mercy. Why? None of that's rational. We're deserving of judgment, punishment, but we're loved.
The entire story of redemption and afterwards, all built off of miracles.
Yeah, and then you could just start listing from talking snakes to fish swallowing prophets to virgin births, right? Resurrections from the dead. And what Kierkegaard is doing, he's not trying to get you to despair of there being a God. He's trying to get you to despair that your reason can get you to him. Okay. So he's using reason, and that was that quote I gave you. God gave me a great intellect to tear down the strongholds of the intellectuals. And if you read Kierkegaard, he's not irrational. He's not like, oh, I had this vision this morning, or some angel whispered in my ear. No, he's using logic and reason to show why you can't trust logic as reason, which is a paradox. Which means we're getting close to the truth in Fred's world. He wants this to drive us to our knees in prayer that God will have mercy on our wretched souls, and it requires now a leap of faith. He coined this one. And for Kierkegaard, faith becomes the most sure way of knowing. What?
Yeah.
Faith becomes the most sure way of knowing.
Yeah.
But here I want to be very careful, because faith can mean everything from, I use the example of my football team's going to pull it out in the last 2 minutes, to my significant other's going to be faithful, to God loves me. And Nietzsche, who was also an existential philosopher, said faith is wishful thinking. That's how he defined it. Where Kierkegaard is saying, no, faith is the most sure knowledge available to humans. Because in faith, God is entering in and giving us a perspective that is outside of or beyond our own, like revelation, illumination, those sorts of things. It's like a teeter-totter for Kierkegaard. If you have a lot of faith, if you're heavy in faith, you're going to be light in reason. And if you're heavy in reason, you're going to be light in faith.
But then how do you know what to have faith in?
Oh, that's another good point, Edward. It's not just having faith, because like the David Koresh crowd had a ton of faith. They were up in Rancho Santiago. That Hale Bop had a mothership, and if they committed suicide with coins on their eyes, they were able to catch a ride out of this place. And they did it. And you're just like, no. But it was a type of faith, this blind leap into the void. But it wasn't in a very good thing. So I would say it's not only where does the faith come from, but what is the faith in? So that's good. And what Nietzsche's talking about is when we're just hoping or self-generating, wishful thinking, I agree with Nietzsche on that one. That type of faith needs to be like lanced like an abscess and let the poison, because we can wishful think ourselves into all kinds of horrible situations. But the type of faith Kierkegaard's talking about, it's a gift from God. It comes from God. You're not born with it. You can't inherit it from your parents. You can't get it by going to a Christian school or church. God has to give you the ability to believe in him and who Jesus claimed to be. He's speaking of it in a very Christian context. And this is his solution to angst. And, oh, I got rid of him. But all those little circles I showed you, the way we can get past alienation is through Christ and the gift of the Spirit. Because if you have Christ in you, for the first time, you can actually have fellowship. And it's actually the Spirit of God in you fellowshipping with the Spirit of God in others. So that's the Kierkegaardian solution of how you never have to be alone again. And at least in my personal life, when I was given that gift of faith, it didn't answer a lot of my doubts or questions, but I never have been alone since. And it's kind of mystical too, though, because it was a personal experience. It came upon me. I couldn't force God out of the heavens. I couldn't find him under a rock or behind a tree. It had to be his work, his timing. But after it happened, no one could tell me God wasn't real. It was self-verifying. It would be like you trying to tell me I didn't have a mother or something. It's like, no, I'm pretty sure I do. I just talked to her. And it's like, I've got a lot of atheist friends, and it's so fun. They're just constantly trying to engage me with proof to us God is real and all of that. And if only God would just talk to us. I was just like, well, are you listening? And quite comfortably, I will just speak to them the word of the Lord, what I believe is the word of the Lord. And I was like, how was that? That was God speaking to you. And we have really interesting conversations, but I really believe I'm indwelt by the very Spirit of God. I'm not just Fred anymore. Fred doesn't roll alone. Fred is always with his Creator. And, but I'm also quite aware, if people have not had that encounter, I sound like a madman. Questions, comments? How much time I got?
It's 3 or 3.
Good.
Or about 3 or 4.
10 minutes. let me give you a secular person, just because I want to show you between Kierkegaard and this guy Nagel. Would someone help me? I'm sorry. Running out of, I'll get some. Maybe just take those, or this one off. All right, I'll move over. Thomas Nagel, I was at San Diego State taking a philosophy of mind class. Fantastic. The teacher turned out to be a naturalist materialist, however. Anyone familiar with that worldview, what they believe? Naturalist materialist?
Yeah, we only believe in like the physical material world.
Right. So here I'm taking a class on mind with a guy who doesn't even believe we have one. He believes we have a brain, but it's what we would call an epiphenomenologist. I know these philosophical terms. Epiphenomenology is this idea where you believe you have a brain and it can affect your mind, but your mind cannot affect the brain. They would see it almost like the brain is your physical self and your mind is like a shadow of the brain. So they're not saying it doesn't exist, but it only exists because you have a physical body, a physical brain, and once those are gone, so is your mind.
Would that be like the same as to say like when people associate the heart with like their feelings and their emotions and stuff like that? And like feeling love?
Yeah, but they're going to break it all down to biochemical reactions happening in the brain, probably.
Okay.
Love is just a chemical reaction. Fantastic. So Nagel wrote this book called A View from Nowhere. What a great title. And so I'm reading it in this class with this materialist, but it was so existential. I was just digging it. And so basically, Nagel is pointing out, if we're trying to be objective, like think scientific method. You're trying to be a scientist. You're trying not to bring your bias, your prejudice, your presuppositions. So here we have subject one. And he is looking, or she is looking at, objects in the physical material world. So here we got object one, object two, object three. But in order to be objective, we need to step back from our subjective selves and we need to think, what kind of place was I in here when I was observing that tree or holding that coffee mug or reading that book? Because if I was happy or sad, rested or fatigued, sick or well, male or female, intelligent or whatever, it's going to affect that. But to be really, really objective, you have to step back from yourself, observing yourself, and thinking about, yeah, but where was I at here when I was observing myself, observing these things? And hence, there's nowhere you can go, or wherever you go, there you are, you know that old saying? And it's true. Even if I told you the most absolutely true, perfect, capital T truth, as soon as it passed into your awareness, you would subjectify it. Because that's what we do. We're subjects. Well, do I have any objects? Sorry. This kind of put the nail in objectivity for me. And once again, I'm not saying absolutes don't exist. I'm simply saying I, as a human, am not in an epistemic position to know what that is. Because this is all I got. And even if I have the Spirit of God within me, He's not giving me all knowledge and wisdom and understanding of the universe. He's giving me what I need to live this day, or to do what ministry He's having me do. But even though I believe I have God's own Spirit in me, I would not do a thus saith the Lord unless I really believe God was telling me directly, I want you to speak in my name. And to me, that would be terrifying. And if any of you start doing that, I'm going to have a lot of questions for you. And the scripture is very strict with people who claim to be speaking in God's name.
So you said at the beginning of our class sessions that you knew about 3 things.
Yeah.
What are those 3 things?
Oh. I was using Rene Descartes' I think, therefore I am. Because even if I'm being deceived, there's still a me that is being deceived. So I've got the me. And then I think about, well, what kind of things can I know? And I realize I'm a thinking thing that can know things, like I'm a thing that thinks. So that's 2 things. Which now means I'm a thinking thing that knows 2 things, which means I can know multiple things. And I stop there because it just gets silly now.
Right.
But I don't know that I have a body.
Yeah.
For all I know, we're in some spacecraft somewhere in tubes stuck in the wall, right? Or I'm in a rest home drooling on myself with some really good meds, and I'm thinking back to my glory days when I used to teach college and love my students, and I'm just living this. I really don't have any way to verify that's not happening right now. Thank you, nurse. Sorry. I can't think like that too long because I could make myself mental really quickly. Any other comments, questions? I don't. Oh, I did, because I have been kind of taking reason to the woodshed. It cracks me up because it's not just me. I think Luther called reason Aristotle's little whore. And that always just made me laugh so hard. Because for one, we weren't allowed to use that language in my circles. And just to hear this guy who's so elevated in Protestant circles have such a dim view of reason, or you could say the misuse. But that was Mr. Logic, right? The syllogisms. You know, if A and B are true, then you can draw these logical conclusions. And I do love logic. I do love reason. And this was one of the philosophical fallacies that really resonated with me, and I forget the name of it, but it's where, because I've shown all the ways reason can be faulty or abused, it would be easy to think, well, then let's just throw it out. And that's not what I'm suggesting, please. Same with critical thinking. I love critical thinking, but I honestly believe it's not possible for humans. But that doesn't mean I don't want us to try. And so instead of just doing this either reason's good or reason can't be trusted, I want you to think it more of like a continuum and to be wary of it, but use it as to the best you can. Same with critical thinking. I don't think we can ever be in this objective, completely unbiased place where we've let all our presuppositions go, but we sure can work on it. And like being aware, I'm a male, I'm an American, I'm a certain age, I have a certain level of intelligence, I have certain religious, political backgrounds, I've lived in different geographic areas. I have to be able to account for those in my reason process to be the best critical thinker I can be. Now, yeah, I'm not going to be 100%, I don't even know how close I can get. But I do want to keep shooting for that. And I always just like to turn Jesus' little phrase on its ear a little bit, where they were paying the tax money, right? Or they were asking him about taxes. And he's like, show me a coin. And it had Caesar on it. He goes, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. And that's how I would recommend this. Use reason where it's appropriate, but use faith where faith is appropriate. And I think that will help you navigate, because I do believe with Thomas Aquinas, God made us as rational beings. That's part of being made in the image of God. But we're also passionate beings. We also have the nous. We have all these different things. And most importantly, if it so be that Christ is in you, that you have the Holy Spirit, well then, good Lord, what possibly more could you want or need? And if I could get someone, but even then, I would want people to be asking themselves, how do I know that's the Holy Spirit and not just my own wandering desires or my culture or the way I was taught to interpret the Bible? I would want them to wrestle with that. Spirit, is this you, or is it just how I want it to be? Questions, comments? It was a good class. You get stuff. You can turn it off.